hello everybody and welcome. I'm Ruth Whitfield. I'm the head of the Educational Development and Learning Development team at the University of Bradford. We're in the Directorate of Learning, Teaching and Quality and Enhancement. And whilst Jackie's already said hello, I'm going to leave her to just introduce herself now.
Hello, so I'm an educational developer in Ruth's team. I joined the university in January 2020, and well, I'll explain more about my role later on.
Thanks, Jackie. We're going to talk to you today about a journey that started back in 2018 and which concerns the ways in which we deliver professional development to those involved in teaching and or the support of learning at Bradford. So just to give you, Jackie, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thanks. Just to give you a flavour of what we're going to talk about today. Katrina, in this morning's keynote, talked about still being alive and with buds of hope and joy. And that struck a chord, and I'm hoping that you might see some of that in the story that we're going to share. I'm going to outline where we were back in 2018, because at that point, Jackie wasn't part of the team. She wasn't at the university at that point. And then I'll outline some of the really busy work that happened in 2019. And then Jackie will share a little bit about what the lived experience is like of our Bradford Fellowship Scheme, which some of you may have read about already in educational developments. So going back to September 2018, up to that point, just to give you a little bit of background, we had a PGCert in higher education practice. It was accredited by Advanced HE at D1 and D2. And we also had a CPD scheme which had been running for several years, which was for those with 3 years or more experience. And that was accredited D1 to D4. This is UK PSF, obviously. In September 2018, there was a major restructure. And the team that had previously comprised of a mix of academic and professional service staff was effectively disbanded and reduced to a new team, which just comprised 2 people, one of whom was me, and I was in a new post heading up a team. And it had 1 person in it who was new to educational development, and we had 3 vacant posts. So it was quite a testing time, apart from the trauma of a restructure, but also it was a testing time because the PGCert had a September 2018 intake, and the PGCert had been suspended. So the decision was made at fairly short notice to outsource the PGCert and that small cohort. So that was the scenario that I found myself in a completely new job, no team to deliver anything, and I was still expected to deliver CPD. So my first question, if you wouldn't mind popping into the chat, what would you have done in that situation? I might learn a lot from hindsight now, but what would your reaction have been at that point? So if you could just pop something in the chat, that would be really useful. Don't be shy. Any offers?
I can see people typing.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, think quickly about who in the university could help. Yes, thanks, Fran. Okay. Any others? I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, everybody's shy. So not sure. Thanks, Judith. Okay, well, I wasn't sure either. So what happened was the VC asked me to do an options appraisal. So I did this and found some quite interesting results. It happens that because it was an academic programme run through a professional service at that point, we had sort of a lot of duplication, because we had a team that was administering the CPD scheme, and the PGCert was run through an academic school, which happened to be Faculty of Health Studies, which does sound a little bit illogical, but it works better than one might perhaps have expected. But we had two teams administering 2 areas of accredited provision, but neither team sort of dealt with each other in that sense. There were some issues with the PGCert in that staff were finding it hard to devote the time to it. They didn't turn up to graduation for it because they already had PhDs, and there were fair number of sort of cost savings that could have been made. And one of the key things was that we were trying to move quite quickly, because higher education at that point was moving quite dramatically in terms of the context we were working in. And we found that the PGCert wasn't actually offering the agility to be able to support the new staff in the way that we'd wanted. So after a series of papers to the Learning and Teaching Committee, and meetings with unions and re-accreditation, and all this went on in 2019, we got full accreditation of a new programme, which was Bradford Fellowships, which we're going to have a look at now. If you could move to the next slide. Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so if you've read educational developments, some of this might be familiar with it, but with you, but I'll just go through it very briefly. So we begin with an induction, and this is effectively an induction to learning and teaching at Bradford for all staff, but it's also an induction to the scheme. So all staff, whether they're new or established, take some time to work through an induction. And the reason it's for established staff is that because of the pace of change, we wanted to ensure that staff were actually as up to date with the context in which they were teaching as they needed to be. It then branches out into 3 pathways, and 2 of them are accredited by Advanced HE, and the graduate pathway is for our postgraduates who teach. That's a Bradford specific, and that gives us the postgraduates the opportunity and eligibility to be able to work on support teaching. So the graduate pathway, previously we'd had an IPD framework, and so that sort of replaced that. We'd also previously had the first module of the PGCert accredited at D1, but what we'd found was that the postgrads, even though they wanted the development, they didn't actually have the sufficient experience and depth of teaching that was needed to be able to demonstrate D1. So what we've done with the graduate pathways, we've focused that on UK PSF knowledge. The 2 other pathways accredited by Advanced HE, so effectively the taught pathway moves the teaching or the taught theory, if you like, from the PGCert into the Bradford Fellowship scheme. But we've done away, previously it was 18 months and had 3 modules, but we've done away with the assessments, and the assessment is effectively a UK PSF application. We offer that at D1 and D2. And then the experience pathways for those with 3 years experience or more, and effectively that's just continuation of the CPD scheme that we used to have previously. Now, one of the things that we've learnt in the past in terms of some of the student activities that we've done is that students don't think much beyond their degrees. So we'd had a series of projects at Bradford, one of which was Outduction back in 2010. And so using that sort of notion, we have an outduction so that once students and participants have completed successfully, rather than let them go, we say, right, now you need to think about what the next stage might be, and to think about what opportunities might be there for you to be able to move forward and plan your development. And then Shortly afterwards, we also linked that into Bradford Teaching Fellow, which was a rebranding of our Vice Chancellor's Teaching Excellence Awards, and also as part of the pipeline for NTF and Kate. And so it's sort of a revisit, so that when people have done outduction, they might actually, if they've done D2, they might actually plan for what they need to do in terms of their development and their positioning within the university, to then think about when and how they might sort of come back as a senior fellow, and then they'd join the scheme again and join perhaps a different pathway. So if we can go to the next slide. So at the time that we were developing the scheme, as I say, we only had at that time 2 of us. We shortly afterwards appointed another educational development developer, but we only had 2 in post and 2 vacancies. So it was important that we streamlined things to make it as effective as possible from our end as well. So this slide shows you the typical journey of someone who is on the top pathway working through D2. But the initial stages are also shared by the graduate pathway and the D1 taught pathway. I'll talk about the experience pathway shortly in a moment. So the 2 induction units that we have, these are now all online, and Jackie will talk more about those, but the 2 induction units are for everyone, and that's set in the context of Bradford and the context of where we are in terms of higher education sector. As I've mentioned, we then move on to looking at core knowledge and professional values, and everybody works together, and so that there is an exchange of ideas and sharing of experience with the postgraduates. But it's essentially, given that some of the postgraduates are not teaching, it's essentially looking at the theories of learning, etc. We then move on to focus onto the areas of activity, and after 2 units, and it looks there as though it's very prescriptive A1 and A2, but we do offer sort of optionality in those for those who are wanting to do D1. So the graduate fellows sort of leave us after 3 months, and those who have done D1 submit their applications after 6 months, and those who are working towards D2 continue through to the end. So we've reduced it down from 18 months to sort of just short of a year, and that seems to be working quite well. For those who are on the experience pathway, they have access to all these units. They're not required to work through them, but we have known that people are sort of dipping in and out of them. And because they're experienced, they have the opportunity to submit at any one of those submission points. So we find that sort of the end of March, July and November, July, November and March, etc., depending on the submission points, they're really busy, because those are also our intakes, because we have 3 intakes a year as well. So we also have lots of other opportunities that are supporting the scheme. So our professional practice programme, that's our sort of CPD programme, which is available to the wider university, but we have something called educational development days, where we actually focus on an area of activity, but we take it and look at it through different lenses so that it's always fresh and offering something else. And that supports the Bradford Fellowships. They're optional sessions. To support K4, we have a show and tell community, and actually just after this presentation we have a meeting of the show and tell. But that brings colleagues from across the university sharing practice in the way in which they are using technology to support their learning and teaching. To support scholarship, we also have a PEDAR group, which is a sort of scholarly community as well, and that's steadily growing. And the one that's compulsory to the scheme is peer-supported review of teaching practice, because we wanted the scheme to be developmental, and peer-supported review of teaching practice has been adopted by the university as part of remaining in good standing. For the taught pathway, that peer supported review is through teaching observation, whereas for other people on the experience pathway, it can be any aspect of UK PSF that's peer reviewed. And the chart there shows you the current situation. Well, mid-November, we've just this week hit the November deadline for registration, so the picture has slightly changed, but that shows you the number of current participants, and you can see there that we've got quite a lot of D3 on the experience pathway. And currently, as of mid-November, we had 154 participants on the scheme. This gives an overview of the taught pathway, because we have those previous figures that are slightly skewed by the number of postgrads that we have. And this shows you the amount of current participants on the different pathways that are accredited. We don't have anybody on hold at the moment, and the figures may look relatively low at the moment in terms of success, but in context, to just give a little bit of context, the D3 pathway, the senior fellow pathway, the CPD scheme that we had previously, which had run for 5 years, had only seen, sorry, it had run for 6 years. It had only seen 5 participants, but already we've tripled that within 2 years of starting the scheme. So we're really pleased with the way things are going. D4s, we've got a small group working towards them, but that's sort of a little bit problematic, but we are growing capacity there as well and rebuilding capacity there. But overall, we're really pleased with how things are going. Now, Jackie and her colleague joined the scheme in the week in which it was actually, it was launched. I remember it well. She'd been in post 2 days and then came into shadow to see how it was. And so Jackie has been sort of learning and growing with the scheme as it's gone along. So I'm going to pass over to Jackie now. You've seen from me what the intentions were, and Jackie's now going to sort of say how well it's gone or not, as the case may be. So thanks, Jackie. I'll move over to you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. So I'm just going to talk really about some of the benefits and challenges, and very happy if you want to put any questions in the chat. We have got time for questions later, and we've also got a bit of a breakout room time to chat as we go through. So I'll just do a bit of talking. Even though we call one of the pathways, as Ruth explained, the taught pathway, it isn't really a traditional taught pathway in the way that you might expect from a PGCert. It's a scaffolded learning journey, really, that gives access to a range of resources and activities which we can refresh and update on an ongoing basis. And participants, to some extent, navigate it at their own pace, and they can return to it in different ways at different stages in their teaching career, depending what they're aiming to, which level of fellowship they're aiming at. So the way we designed it, myself and my fellow educational development team with Ruth's guidance, is as a series of online units. This is what we call the taught pathway. And each of those uses the iCare structure. That's originally from Hoffman and Ritchie, and you'll see the reference on the final slide. So iCare stands for introduce, connect, apply, reflect, extend. So within each of these sort of online units, there are various activities, there are readings, there are quizzes, surveys, discussion boards, Padlets, videos, and all sorts of links out to other resources. And then, as Ruth explained, and it's quite important, running alongside the online units is our professional practice programme, and in particular the educational development days, which are aligned to the UK PSF areas of activity, and then the other CPD sessions that Ruth mentioned, like the PEDAR group show and tell. And that's where the participants get to meet in person and connect and discuss and debate in a sort of live way their learning, and also to work on their applications. And then the sort of third element is this Pebble Pad workbook that Ruth designed, which is a personal reflective tool, and it explores all the UK PSF dimensions. And that's where people can think about what activities might be relevant to their application, and they can start building their application, and they can share that Pebble Pad workbook with their mentors, and we on the team can also see it. So benefits and challenges then. The first one really, so I joined in January 2020, and obviously 21st of March, we all went on lockdown. So it was great in one way that we were already operating online when COVID struck, because this meant that our participants were able to continue working at their own pace while we got really busy with supporting people in the shift to online assessment, online learning, etc. So that was a really good thing. In designing the units, which we were kind of doing and uploading quite quickly, it wasn't always easy to translate the learning materials and the learning approaches that had originally been designed for the PGCert. So they'd been designed for face-to-face delivery within a traditional credit-bearing setup, and we had to think through what contact time meant, how to replace in-person activities with online activities, how to build a sense of community, how to encourage intellectual exchange. But they were all the questions that the staff we were supporting were asking themselves at the same time about how to translate their learning to online. So there was a real exchange at that time, which was very interesting. And we used lots of different resources, but as a central basis, we used Garrison, Anderson and Archer's community of inquiry model. So we were able to kind of test that in practice. I think the access was a real benefit. Participants really appreciate the easy access to the learning and to the resources. The big problem for us is keeping track of everyone, because we're not meeting them on a regular basis face to face. As Ruth said, there are 3 intakes per year. Graduate fellows, D1s and D2s have longer, and then the D3s have, well, they have the same time as the D2s, but everyone's doing different pathways at different times. If people don't get through the first time, then they're remaining. So it can be a little bit difficult to just keep track of where everybody is. A really good thing is that it has enabled us to model good practice around accessibility, around structure, around active online learning, use of TEL tools. And this was a massive plus, especially during COVID. And I've got some comments on the next couple of screens to back that up. But at the same time, we were ourselves learning as we went along. So for instance, we used a lot of discussion boards in the first iteration, and participation was really strong in those at first, but it dropped off. And people, the difficulty with that is this self-paced learning, that people are doing different things at different times. So we learned we couldn't rely so much on discussion boards as we went along. We kind of introduced different kinds of activities. And another lesson was that people didn't necessarily tell you if they had a problem. So we introduced some just little catch-ups, just 1 hour online catch-ups for the various groups to say, where are you? How are you doing? Have you got any issues? Have you got any questions? I don't think anyone here would claim that nothing is lost when you don't meet as whole people in a real 3-dimensional space. And I think that's something for all of us and all our academic colleagues that we learned during the pandemic. But the upside, and I think Ruth showed this in one of her slides, is that Bradford Fellowships, rather than sort of operating separately, became part of this network of activities and forums that we offer. Show and tell, we've got Programme Leaders Forum, there's the PEDAR group, there's the various professional practice sessions that we offer, and it all feels like part of the same networked exchange and support. So just on the self-paced learning, it is a real benefit for busy staff, but it is quite a challenge as well. And I think in Ruth's original vision, she sort of saw it as being more structured than it turned out to be in reality. Partly we introduced the catch-ups to try and deal with that, to give people a sense of where they should be. But it is quite difficult to control when you don't have to show up to a class with your homework done. It's very easy to put something on the back burner. I would say that in the end, I think the freedom of the scheme outweighs any of those issues. We've had better take up. I think people think it's more accessible. They're going to be able to do it. They're going to be able to work around and fit it in. And we've had more people successfully through the programme. It has been a little bit more difficult to sustain once people came back onto campus, but I think that's to do with the fact that everybody's workload rose during COVID and it hasn't gone down again since they came back onto campus. The other thing I really like about the scheme is that as people go through, they then become mentors, and lots of people volunteer to become mentors or panel members. And there's this real sort of effect of sharing good practice across the institution. So I'm just going to show you some of the feedback that we've had, give you a time to have a read of that. That top one on the left is about the mix of teaching methods. That was right from the start, January 2020. I put a little critical one down at the bottom about people struggling to find things online. Again, I think that's something that we've sorted out since then. People revisiting, finding the idea that they can dip in and out. And we did improve the structure and make it much easier for people to find things as they went along. So again, I'll just click through to some more participant feedback. Here we have somebody in the purple speech bubble saying that they use some of the tips to improve their own Canvas modules, and that was during the whole COVID session. And there's a mention of the induction, the 2 units, which, as Ruth explained, operate as an induction to learning and teaching for all staff. And then this lovely comment about the Canvas site. Canvas is our VLE, which we have worked a lot on developing and making it good and easy to follow. So I hope you've all had a chance to read through that. We went through a full reaccreditation this summer, and we have achieved reaccreditation until 2025. So this is just some of the commendations from the accreditation panel. Again, I'll just give you a little bit of time to have a look at those. I think that top one on the right, engagement with fellowship as part of the career journey. It's part of what the HR units have a career journey called the Bradford Academic, and it is very closely linked into that. And I think that's quite an important part of it. People do have a workload allocation, and the outduction is something that was praised.